The February wind cut through the Utah Valley like a rusty blade, carrying with it the promise of another storm. Thatcher Kane stood at the edge of his property, watching the gray clouds gather over the distant mountains. The cattle huddled together in the lower pasture, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. He'd need to move them closer to the barn before nightfall. 15 years. That's how long he'd been doing this alone. 15 years of mending fences with no one to hold the other end of the wire. 15 years of eating beans straight from the pot because setting a proper table seemed pointless. 15 years of sleeping on one side of a bed that still felt too big. He pulled his collar higher against the wind and headed back toward the ranch house. The structure stood like a weathered monument to stubbornness, 2 stories of graying wood and stone foundation that his father had laid in '61. The porch sagged slightly on the left side, and one of the shutters hung crooked. Martha would have nagged him to fix it by now. But Martha was gone, buried beneath the cottonwood tree on the hill where wildflowers bloomed in spring. Sometimes Thatcher still found himself saving up things to tell her, little observations about the ranch or the weather, before remembering there was no one to tell them to. The inside of the house was hardly warmer than outside. He'd let the fire die down while working, and now the cold had crept into every corner. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one, a practical arrangement for a man who didn't entertain. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light, filtering through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Thatcher was reaching for the kindling when he heard the unmistakable sound of wagon wheels on the frozen road. He paused, frowning. Jake Monroe had been by just yesterday with supplies from town. The Hendersons lived too far east to visit in this weather, and no one else had business at the Kane Ranch. He stepped onto the porch, squinting against the wind. A hired wagon from Millwater was struggling up the rutted path. The driver hunched against the cold. But it wasn't the driver that made Thatcher's breath catch, it was the passenger. A woman sat straight-backed beside him, wearing a dark traveling dress and a bonnet that did little to protect her from the elements. Even from a distance, he could see her gloved hands gripping a carpet bag. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house. The driver, old Samuel Briggs from the livery, touched his hat. "Afternoon, Thatcher. Got a delivery for you." "I didn't order anything," Thatcher said, his voice rough from disuse. The woman didn't wait for assistance. She gathered her skirts and climbed down with practiced efficiency, though he noticed her boots were thin-soled city shoes, already soaked through from snow. She was younger than him by maybe 10 years, with auburn hair pulled back severely and gray eyes that studied him with unsettling directness. "Mr. Thatcher Kane." Her voice carried a slight Eastern accent, educated but not affected. "Just Thatcher. And you are—" She lifted her chin. "Eloise Mercer, your bride." The words hung in the air like icicles ready to fall. Thatcher stared at her, then at Samuel, who was already turning the wagon around. "Hold on," Thatcher called, but Samuel just waved. "Already paid. Thatcher, both ways," though she insisted she wouldn't need the return trip. The old man chuckled. "Mighty confident. This one, best of luck to you both." "Samuel, wait!" But the wagon was already retreating down the path, leaving deep ruts in the snow. Thatcher turned back to the woman Eloise, who stood as if planted, her carpetbag at her feet and her hands clasped in front of her. Snow was beginning to dust her shoulders. "There's been a mistake," he said. "I think not." She reached into her bag and produced an envelope. "Your letter was quite specific, seeking a capable woman of good character to share life on a working ranch. Must be hardy, practical, and unafraid of isolation. You promised fair treatment and a respectable home." Thatcher took the letter with numb fingers. His name was there, clear as day, along with an advertisement from the Matrimonial Times dated 3 months prior. The handwriting looked close enough to his own, but he knew he'd never written these words. "I didn't write this." Then who did? A note of worry crept into her voice for the first time. "The return address is yours. The postmark is from Millwater. The signature—" He looked closer. It was a decent forgery, good enough to fool someone who didn't know his hand. But the T was too fancy, the R too round. His mind immediately went to Jake Monroe, who'd been pestering him about his solitary life for years. Jake, who'd had too much whiskey last Christmas and declared that Thatcher was wasting away like an old bull put out to pasture. "Ma'am, Miss Mercer, I'm sorry you've come all this way, but—" "Mrs. Mercer," she corrected. "I'm a widow." That stopped him short. He looked at her again, noticing the worn edges of her gloves, the careful mending on her dress. A widow who'd answered a matrimonial advertisement, desperate enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger. The wind picked up, driving snow horizontally across the yard. Eloise shivered but didn't complain. "Storm's coming," he said unnecessarily. "Yes. Samuel won't make it back to town if it hits." "I see." They stood there, two strangers bound by someone else's deception, while the sky darkened overhead. Thatcher knew what Martha would say, knew it as surely as if she were standing beside him. "You can't send her back into that storm. Thatcher Kane. What kind of man would that make you?" "You can shelter here tonight," he said finally. "There's a room upstairs. We'll sort this out when the weather clears." Relief flickered across her features, quickly hidden. "Thank you. I won't be any trouble." He doubted that very much. A woman in his house already felt like trouble, like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples in all directions. But he picked up her carpetbag surprisingly heavy and led her inside. Eloise paused in the doorway, taking in the sparse furnishings, the cold fireplace, the layer of dust on everything. If she was disappointed, she didn't show it. "The kitchen?" she asked. He gestured vaguely.
"Such as it is."
She unpinned her bonnet, revealing more of that auburn hair, and rolled up her sleeves. "Then I'll start with supper. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in some time. Mr. Kane." "I manage fine on my own." "I'm sure you do." She was already investigating his meager supplies. "But since I'm here, and since you've been kind enough to offer shelter, the least I can do is earn my keep. Do you have eggs?" "Henhouse out back, but—" She was already reaching for a shawl hanging by the door, Martha's shawl. He realized with a jolt. "I'll just be a moment. Perhaps you could see to that fire. It's rather cold for cooking." And then she was gone, leaving him standing in his own kitchen like a visitor. The house already felt different with her in it, as if her presence had awakened something that had been sleeping. He could hear her outside, talking to the chickens in a matter-of-fact way that would have made him smile if he still remembered how. He built up the fire, trying not to think about the last time a woman had cooked in this kitchen, trying not to remember Martha humming while she worked, the way she'd brush flour from her cheek with the back of her hand. Eloise returned with an apron full of eggs, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Your hens are well kept," she said. "That speaks well of a man, when his animals are healthy even in winter." She worked with quiet efficiency, and soon the smell of biscuits filled the air. She found his stores of preserved vegetables, a ham he'd been saving, and somehow turned his bachelor provisions into something resembling a meal. Thatcher found himself watching from the doorway, disturbed by how natural she looked in his space. "You can sit," she said without turning around. "I'm not accustomed to being studied like a museum piece." He took his usual chair, then realized he hadn't set the table for two since he got up to fetch another plate, and Eloise smiled slightly. "Thank you." They ate in relative silence, the storm building outside. The windows rattled in their frames, and snow began to pile against the glass. Eloise ate steadily but moderately, like someone who'd known hunger and learned not to waste food. "How long were you traveling?" he asked finally. 6 days from Chicago. Before that, 2 weeks from Baltimore." "That's a long way to come for a lie." She set down her fork carefully. "Mr. Kane, I sold everything I owned for train fare. I have exactly $3.40 to my name, whether you wrote that letter or not. I'm here now, and that storm isn't letting up." He pushed back from the table. "I'll show you the room." The stairs creaked under their feet as he led her to the small bedroom at the end of the hall. It had been his sister's room back when she was alive. The furniture was covered in dust sheets, but the bed was sound and the roof didn't leak. "There are quilts in the chest," he said. "Chamber pots under the bed, privies out back, but I wouldn't recommend it in this weather." "This will be fine." She set her carpetbag on the floor. "Mr. Kane, what will you do?" "About what?" "About me, when the storm clears." He didn't have an answer. The thought of sending her back to nothing made his chest tight. But keeping her was impossible, wasn't it? "We'll figure it out tomorrow," he said. "Yes," she agreed softly. "Tomorrow." He left her there, closing the door firmly behind him. Downstairs, he banked the fire and checked the livestock one more time. The storm was fully upon them now, sealing them in together. Two strangers, one roof, and someone's idea of a joke that might have just changed everything. As he settled onto the sofa where he'd taken to sleeping, couldn't bring himself to use the bed he'd shared with Martha, he heard footsteps above. Eloise Mercer, the woman who'd appeared like a ghost from his past, was walking in his house. For 15 years, he'd been alone. Now, for better or worse, he wasn't. Outside, the storm raged on, burying the old world under fresh snow. And somewhere in that wind, Thatcher could almost swear he heard Martha laughing. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of howling wind and snow piling against the windows. 3 days of Eloise Mercer moving through Thatcher's house like she'd always belonged there. On the first morning, Thatcher woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, not the bitter chicory brew he'd grown accustomed to. He found Eloise in the kitchen, already dressed and with her hair pinned up properly, stirring something on the stove. "Found your coffee stores," she said without turning. "You had them wrapped well, but stored in the wrong place. They'll keep better in the pantry than under the sink." He grunted noncommittally and reached for a cup. She'd already set one out for him. "I'll be seeing to the animals," he said. "Breakfast first. Man can't work on an empty stomach." "I've managed for 15 years. Yes, I gathered that." She set a plate in front of him. "Eggs, bacon, and flapjacks. Eat. The cattle won't starve in the next 10 minutes. The food was good. Better than good. He ate mechanically, trying not to think about how long it had been since someone had cooked breakfast for him. When he finished, she was already heating water for dishes. "I'll do those," he said. "No need. I know where everything goes now." That stopped him. "You've been through my cupboards." "How else would I cook?" She glanced at him over her shoulder. "Mr. Kane, if you're worried I'm going to steal your grandmother's china, you can rest easy. You don't appear to have any." Despite himself, he almost smiled. "Martha always wanted proper dishes, never got around to it." Eloise's hand stilled for just a moment. "Your wife?" "Yes." She nodded and returned to washing. "The quilts on the bed are beautiful. Her work, her mother's mostly, Martha added to them." They lapsed into silence. Thatcher pulled on his coat and headed out into the storm. The barn was only 50 yards from the house, but in the whiteout conditions. He kept one hand on the guide rope he'd strung years ago for just such weather. The animals were restless but safe, and he spent longer than necessary forking hay and checking water troughs, delaying his return to the house that suddenly felt too small. When he finally went back inside, stomping snow from his boots, he found Eloise on her hands and knees, scrubbing the kitchen floor. She'd tucked her skirts up and tied a kerchief over her hair. "That floor hasn't been washed in." "I'm aware," she said dryly. "I found things living in the corners that probably predate the territory's statehood." "You don't have to do that." She sat back on her heels. What would you have me do instead? Sit in that chair and twiddle my thumbs. I'm not built for idleness. Mr. Kane. He watched her work, noting the efficient way she moved, the strength in her arms. This wasn't a woman who'd spent her life being waited on. You said you were a widow, he ventured. 3 years now. She didn't look up. Thomas was a clerk in Baltimore. Consumption took him. Children. Her movement slowed. One, she died with her father. The words hung heavy between them. Thatcher understood that particular pain, the way it hollowed you out and left you walking around like a normal person when inside you were nothing but empty space. I'm sorry, he said, as am I, about your Martha. He nodded and retreated to the main room, where he tried to focus on mending harness instead of listening to the sounds of domesticity from the kitchen. But he found himself aware of every movement, every small noise. When she started humming some tune, he didn't recognize he had to step outside again despite the storm. By the second day, a routine had emerged without either of them discussing it. Eloise rose early, had coffee ready when he came downstairs, and set about transforming his neglected house with ruthless efficiency. She attacked dust and cobwebs like personal enemies, reorganized cupboards, and somehow made meals from supplies he'd forgotten he had. You've got good stores laid in, she commented that afternoon, pulling jars from the pantry. But half of these preserves are going bad. When's the last time you checked them? He shrugged from his position by the fire, where he was pretending to read a month-old newspaper. Can't say. She made a disapproving sound and continued her inventory. These pickles are from 1880. The date's right on the jar. Martha put those up. Her hands stilled. Oh, well, they're probably still good for another year or so. Throw them out, he said roughly. Throw out anything that's gone bad. She studied him for a long moment. If you're sure. I'm sure. But when he passed through the kitchen later, he noticed she'd moved the old preserves to a high shelf instead of discarding them. Something about that small act of kindness made his chest tight. That evening, she produced a deck of cards from her carpet bag. Do you play? Haven't in years. Good. I'll have a chance of winning then. She dealt with practiced hands. Poker or rummy? You play poker. Mr. Kane, I've worked in 3 boarding houses and survived on my own for 3 years. Yes, I play poker, though we'll have to use beans for stakes, unless you're hiding a fortune somewhere. They played until the fire burned low, and Thatcher found himself remembering what it was like to laugh. Eloise had a dry wit and a talent for bluffing that would have served her well in any saloon. Where did you learn to play? He asked, after she'd cleaned him out of beans for the 3rd time. My husband. He said a woman should know how to read men's faces, just in case. She gathered the cards. Of course, he meant in case I needed to know if someone was lying about their intentions. I don't think he imagined I'd use it to take your beans. He sounds like he was a good man. He was. She shuffled the deck absently. Kind to a fault. Probably why he stayed in that drafty office helping people who couldn't pay, instead of taking the job at the bank. A sad smile crossed her face. I was angry about that for a long time. If he'd taken the bank job, we'd have had money for better rooms, better food. Maybe he wouldn't have gotten sick. Can't think that way. Drive yourself mad with what-ifs. She looked at him shrewdly. Speaking from experience. He didn't answer, but she seemed to understand anyway. On the 3rd day, the storm began to break. Weak sunlight filtered through the windows, and the wind no longer rattled the panes. Thatcher knew he should feel relief soon the roads would be passable, and they could sort out this mess with the letter. Instead, he felt an odd reluctance as he watched Eloise knead bread dough, her movements sure and rhythmic. I'll ride to town tomorrow, he said. Talk to Jake Monroe. The one you think wrote the letter. Most likely candidate. He's been after me to remarry for years. Thinks I'm wasting away out here. She shaped the dough into loaves with expert hands.
And are you?
Am I what? Wasting away. He considered the question. Before this week, he would have said no. He was surviving, maintaining the ranch, going through the motions of living. But watching Eloise bring warmth back to his cold house, he realized there was a difference between surviving and living. Maybe, he admitted. She covered the loaves with a clean cloth to rise. Well, at least you're honest. That's more than most men manage. That afternoon, while Eloise was upstairs cleaning, Thatcher found himself in Martha's sewing room, a small space off the kitchen he'd kept closed for years. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sun, and everything was exactly as she'd left it. Fabric folded on shelves, thread organized by color, her thimble still sitting by the window where she'd worked. "Oh," Eloise said from behind him. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not." He touched a piece of blue calico Martha had been saving for a dress. "I just haven't been in here." "I understand." She started to leave, then paused. "Would you mind if I use the sewing supplies? My dress needs mending. And I noticed your shirts." "Take whatever you need." The words came out harsher than intended. No sense letting it all rot. That evening, she worked by the fire, darning his socks with tiny, precise stitches. He pretended to read while watching her from the corner of his eye. The lamplight caught the auburn in her hair, and her face was peaceful in concentration. It was such a domestic scene, so achingly familiar yet different, that he had to leave the room. He stood on the porch, breathing cold air and trying to settle his churning thoughts. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried in white. Tomorrow he'd have to deal with reality with Jake and the forged letter and what to do about Eloise Mercer. But tonight... "Coffee?" Eloise asked from the doorway, holding 2 steaming cups. He accepted one gratefully. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the clearing sky. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Isolated, but beautiful. Most people find it too lonely. Lonely is living in a boarding house with 20 other people and not a soul to talk to." She sipped her coffee. "This is just quiet." "You'd go mad after a month. Nothing but cattle and chickens for company." "And you," she pointed out. "Unless you're planning to live in the barn." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. They finished their coffee in silence. But it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that fell between people who didn't need words to fill every space. Later, as he settled onto the sofa for another night, he could hear her moving around upstairs, getting ready for bed in his house, like it was normal, like she belonged. The thought should have disturbed him more than it did. In the morning, he'd ride to town and confront Jake. He'd figure out how to send Eloise back to wherever she needed to go, with enough money to start over properly. He'd return to his solitary life, and in a month or two, this would seem like a strange dream. But lying there in the dark, listening to the house settle around them both, Thatcher found himself hoping the snow might stick around just a little longer. The fever came on suddenly. One moment Eloise was serving supper. The next she was gripping the table edge, her face drained of color. "Just tired," she said when Thatcher started to rise. "The travel catching up with me." But by morning, she was burning up, her skin flushed and clammy. Thatcher found her trying to dress, swaying on her feet. "Get back in bed," he ordered. "The breakfast." "Can wait. You're sick." She tried to protest, but another wave of dizziness sent her back to the bed. Thatcher stood in the doorway, uncertain. He knew how to doctor cattle and horses, how to set a broken bone or stitch a cut, but a sick woman, that was different territory. He fetched water and clean cloths, remembering how Martha had tended him through a bout of pneumonia years back. Cool the fever, keep them hydrated, watch for signs it was turning worse. Simple enough in theory. "I'm fine," Eloise mumbled when he pressed a damp cloth to her forehead. "Just need a moment." "Stop talking and rest." Through the day, He found himself checking on her every hour. She drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes muttering things that made no sense, names he didn't recognize, places he'd never heard of. Once, she called out for her daughter, and the raw pain in her voice made him grip the door frame. By evening, the fever had worsened. She tossed restlessly, tangling in the quilts, her hair damp with sweat. Thatcher knew he should ride for town, fetch Doc Hendricks. But another storm was rolling in. If he left now and got caught in it. He made his decision, pulling a chair beside the bed. He settled in for a long night. The memories came unbidden, as they always did in the dark hours. Martha in that field hospital tent, her nurse's apron stained with blood. She'd volunteered to help during the outbreak of diphtheria in '69, despite his protests. They need trained hands. Thatcher, I can't sit by while children are dying. He'd been in town when the explosion happened. Faulty medical supplies. They said later, chemicals stored improperly. The tent had gone up like tissue paper. By the time he'd ridden out, there was nothing left but charred ground and covered bodies. 6 dead, including 2 nurses, including Martha. "No," Eloise moaned, pulling him back to the present. "Please, no." He wrung out the cloth and bathed her face again. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "Don't leave," she whispered. "Everyone leaves." "I'm not going anywhere," he said, and was surprised to find he meant it. She opened her eyes, fever-bright but focusing on him. "Thomas left, Elizabeth left, everyone—" "Who's Elizabeth?" "My baby." Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "So small. The fever took her first. Then Thomas, I couldn't save them." Thatcher's throat tightened. He covered her hand with his. "Not your fault." "I was supposed to protect her." "Fever's not something you can fight with your hands. Trust me, I know." She studied his face, seeming to really see him for the first time in hours. "Your wife, she was trying to help people." He nodded, not trusting his voice. "Then she was brave, braver than me. I couldn't even help my own family." "That's the fever talking." "No." Her grip tightened. "It's the truth talking. I ran away. Came west because I couldn't stand the sympathy, the pitying looks. Poor Mrs. Mercer lost her whole family, like I was something broken that needed fixing." "Are you—" "What?" "Broken." She laughed, a cracked sound. "Aren't we all?" He thought about that as the night wore on. Broken people, trying to piece themselves back together. Him with his isolation, her with her desperate journey west. Maybe that's what Jake had seen, 2 broken halves that might make something whole. Around midnight, the fever broke. Eloise fell into a deep, natural sleep, her breathing evening out. Thatcher should have returned to his sofa, but instead he stayed in the chair, watching her sleep, in repose. She looked younger, the worried lines around her eyes smoothing out. He must have dozed, because he woke to find her watching him, clear-eyed in the dawn light. "You stayed?" she said softly. "Said I would. Men say a lot of things they don't mean. I'm not most men." "No," she agreed. "You're not." He stood, stretching cramped muscles. "I'll get you some broth." "Thatcher." It was the first time she'd used his given name. "Thank you." He nodded, suddenly unable to meet her eyes, and fled to the kitchen. Over the next days, she recovered slowly. He insisted she stay in bed, bringing her meals, sitting with her in the evenings. They really talked for the first time. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, daughter of a clockmaker, how she'd met Thomas at a church social, how they'd married young and poor but happy, the boarding houses she'd worked in after, the indignities and small cruelties of being a young widow with no protection. "The last place, the owner's son." She stopped, shaking her head. "Let's say he had ideas about what my position included. When I disagreed, I found myself on the street with my belongings." Rage flared in Thatcher's chest. What was his name? It doesn't matter now. I saw the advertisement the next day. It seemed like Providence. She smiled wryly. Even if it was a lie. I'll wire Jake tomorrow. Get money for your fare back east. Back to what? She plucked at the quilt. I told you, I have nothing there. No family, no position, no home. There must be something. Why are you so eager to be rid of me? The question hung between them. Am I that much of a burden? No. The word came out too fast, too emphatic. It's not about you. Then what? He stood, pacing to the window. Outside. Snow fell steadily, blanketing the world in white. How could he explain the fear that gripped him? That letting someone close meant risking that pain again. I had my chance, he said finally. Had a wife, a good life. That ended. I don't get another one. Says who? Says the grave on the hill. Says 15 years of being alone. Says you, she corrected. You're the one who decided you're cursed or punished or whatever story you tell yourself. But Thatcher. She waited until he turned to face her. Martha's gone. My Thomas and Elizabeth are gone. But we're still here. Doesn't that count for something? He couldn't answer. The words she spoke were too close to thoughts he'd buried deep, possibilities he didn't dare examine. That night, he dreamed of Martha for the first time in years. Not the nightmares that had plagued him after her death, but a peaceful dream. She was in her garden, hands dirty from planting, smiling at something in the distance. You always were too stubborn for your own good, she said without looking at him. Martha? She's a good woman. Thatcher, strong, like I was. Now she did turn, and her eyes were kind. Don't waste this chance because you're afraid. I can't replace you. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to live. He woke with tears on his face, the first he'd shed since the funeral, in the pre-dawn darkness. He could hear Eloise moving around upstairs, probably unable to sleep. The sound was comforting rather than intrusive. Another soul awake in the darkness. Another heart beating in his empty house. When she came down for coffee, still pale but steady on her feet, he was waiting. I want to show you something, he said. He led her out to the barn, where he kept a small workshop in the back. Tools hung neatly on the walls, and projects in various stages of completion covered the benches. Chairs he'd been meaning to fix, a cradle he'd started years ago and never finished. I'm not much of a carpenter, he said, but I like working with my hands, making broken things useful again. Eloise ran her fingers over the half-finished cradle. It's beautiful work. Never had reason to finish it. She looked at him then, understanding dawning in her eyes. Thatcher! I'm not good with words, he interrupted. Never have been, but I know something about second chances, about taking broken pieces and making something new. He took a breath. Maybe Jake did us both a favor with that letter. What are you saying? I'm saying, stay, not because you have nowhere else to go, not because of some false letter. Stay because... He struggled for words. Because this house has been cold for 15 years, and you've brought warmth back to it. Because I forgot what it was like to laugh until you beat me at cards. Because when you were sick, I realized I'd rather sit by your bed than be anywhere else. Tears gathered in her eyes. That's quite a speech for a man who's not good with words. Been saving them up, I guess. She stepped closer, and for the first time in 15 years, Thatcher voluntarily reached for another person. Her hand was small in his, calloused from work but warm. Real. Alive. Shh, I'll stay, she whispered, if you're sure. I'm sure. Standing there in the dusty barn, holding hands like nervous youngsters. They both felt the shift. Something broken beginning to mend, something frozen starting to thaw. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the circle of their joined hands, spring had already begun. The ride to Jake Monroe's spread took 2 hours through melting snow and mud. Thatcher had left early, telling Eloise he needed supplies from town. But they both knew the real reason for his journey. The forged letter lay folded in his coat pocket, evidence of a deception that had changed everything. Jake's ranch was smaller than Thatcher's, but well-maintained, with smoke curling from both the main house and the bunkhouse. As Thatcher approached, he spotted his old friend working on a fence near the barn, his distinctive red beard visible even from a distance. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake called out, straightening up. "Thatcher Kane, riding social calls must be the end times." Thatcher dismounted without responding, tying his horse to the fence post. Jake's grin faltered as he took in his friend's expression. "Something wrong at your place?" "You could say that." Thatcher pulled out the letter. "Recognize this." Jake took it, and Thatcher watched his face carefully. The guilt that flashed across his friend's features told him everything he needed to know. "Now, Thatcher." "You son of a bitch!" The words came out quiet, which Jake knew was more dangerous than shouting. "You had no right." "Didn't I?" Jake's own temper flared. 15 years, Thatcher. 15 years of watching you waste away on that ranch, talking to nobody but cattle. Martha wouldn't have wanted. Thatcher's fist connected with Jake's jaw before he could finish the sentence. Jake stumbled back, hand to his face, but didn't retaliate. "Feel better?" Jake asked, working his jaw. "No." "Good. Then maybe you'll listen." Jake picked up his hat from where it had fallen. "Yes, I wrote the damn letter. Posted it to 3 different papers back east. And I'd do it again." "Why?" "Because someone had to. You think I like watching my best friend turn into a ghost. You think any of us do." Jake spat blood into the snow. "Last winter, when that blizzard hit, nobody saw you for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Thatcher. We drew straws to see who'd ride out and check if you were still alive." "I don't need checking on." "Like hell you don't." Jake's voice softened. "You were the one taught me to ride. Remember summer of '68? You and Martha had me over for Sunday dinners when I was just a green kid with no family. And after she died?" "Don't." "After she died, you disappeared. Oh, your body was still here, going through the motions. But you, the real you, gone." Jake met his eyes. "So yeah, I played matchmaker. Figured even if you sent her packing, at least it would wake you up." Thatcher turned away, staring at the mountains. The anger was draining out of him, leaving something more complicated in its wake. "She could have been anyone," he said finally. "Could have been a confidence artist, a thief. I was careful, required references, proof of character. The agency I used was respectable." Jake paused. Is she what? Respectable good woman." Thatcher thought of Eloise bringing warmth back to his cold house, her quiet strength during her illness, the way she'd held his hand in the barn. "Yes," he said simply. Jake grinned, despite his swelling jaw. "Then what are you doing here jawing with me? Get back to your bride." "She's not my—" Thatcher stopped. "What was she exactly? It's complicated. Always is, with the good ones." Jake clapped him on the shoulder. "Look, I'm sorry for the deception, but I'm not sorry for the result. You look more alive than you have in years." As Thatcher rode away, Jake called after him. "Bring her by for Sunday dinner. May's been dying to meet her." Thatcher waved him off, but found himself considering it. Sunday dinners with friends. Like normal people did. Like he used to do. In town, he stopped at the Mercantile, loading up on supplies they actually did need. But he also found himself buying things he hadn't thought about in years. Real coffee, white sugar, a length of blue fabric that reminded him of the dress Eloise had worn the day she arrived. When had he started noticing such things? "Heard you got yourself a mail-order bride, Mrs." Patterson said as she tallied his purchases. The widow ran the store with an iron fist and a tongue that wagged faster than any telegraph. "News travels fast. Samuel Briggs has been telling everyone about the pretty redhead he delivered to your place. course, some folks are saying she's after your land. Others think she's running from something back east. She leaned in conspiratorially. Personally, I think it's about time. That ranch needs a woman's touch. What it needs is for folks to mind their own business. Mrs. Patterson laughed. In Millwater, more chance of snow in July. As he loaded his purchases, Thatcher caught sight of his reflection in the store window. When had he started standing straighter? When had the permanent scowl eased from his face? The ride home took longer, weighted down with supplies and thoughts. The sun was setting as he crested the final hill, painting the valley in shades of gold and pink. Below, smoke rose from his chimney, and warm light spilled from windows that had been dark for too many years. Home. When had it started feeling like home again? Eloise met him at the door, flour in her hair and worry in her eyes. You were gone so long. I thought... She stopped herself. Did you find what you were looking for? I did. She helped him unload, exclaiming over the coffee and sugar like they were treasures. When she found the fabric, she went still. What's this for? Figured you could use a new dress, one that wasn't mended quite so many times. Her eyes filled with tears. Thatcher, you didn't need to. Yes, I did. He took her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. And there's something else. Jake Monroe. He wrote the letter. She nodded slowly. You knew it had to be someone who cared about you. No one else would go to such trouble. You're not angry. Should I be if he hadn't? I'd still be scrubbing floors in a boarding house, trying to avoid the owner's wandering hands. And you'd still be here, alone, convincing yourself that was what you deserved. He pulled the letter from his pocket, holding it between them. Based on a lie. The letter was a lie, she agreed. But is this, she gestured between them, is what we're building here false? He thought about it, then walked to the stove and fed the letter to the flames. They watched it burn together. The evidence of deception turning to ash. Jake invited us for Sunday dinner, he said. His wife May wants to meet you. Us? Eloise repeated, smiling. I like the sound of that. That night after supper, she worked on cutting out her new dress while he repaired a bridle. The domestic scene should have felt false, like playing at something that wasn't real. Instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey. I've been thinking, Eloise said, not looking up from her work, about what you said, building something from broken pieces. What about it? Maybe that's what we're doing, not trying to recreate what we had before, but making something new, something that's just ours. He set down the bridle. Eloise. She looked up then, and the hope in her eyes nearly undid him. I know we started strangely. I know you didn't choose this. But Thatcher, I'm choosing it. Choosing you, if you'll have me. The words he'd thought he'd never say again rose in his throat. But before he could speak, she held up a hand. Don't answer now. Think about it. Really think about what you want, not what you think you deserve or don't deserve. She returned to her sewing. Just know that I'm not here because I have nowhere else to go anymore. I'm here because there's nowhere else I'd rather be. Later, lying on his sofa in the dark, Thatcher stared at the ceiling and thought about second chances, about Jake's deception that had turned into an unexpected gift, about a woman who'd traveled across the country on a lie but had brought truth back into his life. Tomorrow, he'd have to face the town's gossip, the speculation and judgment. He'd have to figure out how to be part of a couple again, how to let someone fully into his life. It terrified him. But for the first time in 15 years, the fear was outweighed by something stronger hope. Upstairs, he could hear Eloise preparing for bed. His wife, he realized, not legally, not yet, but in all the ways that mattered, she was becoming his wife, and he was becoming her husband. Jake Monroe, that interfering bastard, was going to be insufferably smug about this. Thatcher found himself smiling in the darkness. Maybe he'd let him. After all, the man had given him back his life. The forged letter was ashes now. But what it had brought them was real. Sometimes the best things came from the worst deceptions. Sometimes mistakes were just miracles in disguise. The trouble started at Henderson's general store on a Saturday afternoon. Thatcher and Eloise had been living in their careful dance for 3 weeks now, neither married nor not married, but something in between that the town couldn't quite categorize. They'd come in for supplies, Eloise wearing her new blue dress that brought out the color in her eyes. Thatcher was loading flour into the wagon when he heard the voices from inside the store. He recognized Bert McDubbins's slurred tones immediately. The man was drunk more often than sober since his own wife had left him 2 years back. "Mail-order bride," McDubbins was saying loudly. "That's what they're calling it now in my day. We had another name for women who showed up uninvited at men's houses." "Bert, that's enough." "Mrs.," Henderson warned. "Just saying what everyone's thinking. Convenient. Ain't it pretty young widow shows up just when Kane's finally got his ranch running profitable again. Bet she studied up on all the territory's landowners before picking her target." Thatcher set down the flour sack carefully. Too carefully. He was halfway to the door when he heard Eloise's voice, calm and clear. "Mr. McDubbins, is it I believe we haven't been properly introduced? I'm Eloise Mercer." "I know who you are." "Then you know I traveled here based on a letter that turned out to be forged? A cruel joke that left me stranded with nowhere to go. Mr. Kane was kind enough to offer shelter during a storm. If that makes me a fortune hunter in your eyes, then perhaps you need spectacles." Someone snickered, probably young Tom Henderson. McDubbins's voice turned uglier. "Got a sharp tongue on you. Bet that's not all that sharp. How many other ranchers you write to before settling on Kane?" Thatcher pushed through the door just as Eloise stepped closer to McDubbins. The drunk man towered over her, but she didn't back down an inch. "I wrote to no one," she said evenly. "I responded to what I believed was an honest offer of marriage. I've worked for every meal I've eaten at the Kane Ranch. I've mended, cooked, cleaned, and tended stock, which is more than I can say for you. From what I hear, when's the last time you did an honest day's work instead of drinking away your family's savings?" McDubbin's face went purple. "You little—" He raised his hand, whether to point or strike. Thatcher didn't wait to find out. He crossed the store in 3 strides and caught McDubbins's wrist, squeezing until the man yelped. "Touch her and you'll be eating through a straw until summer," Thatcher said quietly. "Defending your mail-order hussy now, Kane." The crack of Thatcher's fist against McDubbin's jaw was loud in the sudden silence. The drunk man crashed into a display of canned goods, sending them rolling across the floor. "Anyone else?" Thatcher looked around the store. Mrs. Patterson was there, and the widow Green, Tom Henderson and his mother, a few ranch hands from neighboring spreads. "Anyone else got something to say about Miss Mercer?" McDubbin struggled to his feet, blood dripping from his nose. "You'll regret this, Kane. That woman's got you twisted around, just like before. And look how that ended." The reference to Martha sent ice through Thatcher's veins. But before he could move, Eloise stepped between them. "How dare you?" she said, her voice shaking with fury. "How dare you speak of his late wife to score points in your petty tantrum? Martha Kane died serving others, which is more nobility than you'll see in a lifetime. You're not fit to speak her name." The store went silent. Even McDubbin seemed shocked by the fierce defense from a woman who'd never met Martha. "Mrs." Henderson cleared her throat. "Bert, I think you should leave. Tom, help him to his horse." As the younger Henderson hauled McDubbins out, Thatcher became aware of Eloise's hand on his arm, grounding him. The rage was still there, but contained now. "Well, Mrs." Patterson said into the silence. "That was certainly educational. Eloise, dear, I have some lovely fabric that just came in. Perhaps you'd like to see—" It was an olive branch, and Eloise took it gracefully. As the women moved away, Thatcher found himself surrounded by the men. "She's got spine," old Jim Walker commented. "Stood up to Bert better than most men would." "McDubbins is a fool," another added. "Everybody knows that woman's been nothing but proper since she arrived." Thatcher just nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The casual acceptance surprised him, but perhaps it shouldn't have. The West had always been more forgiving of unusual circumstances than the East. Outside, Eloise was quiet as they loaded the wagon. It wasn't until they were clear of town that she spoke. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For making a scene, for embarrassing you." He pulled the horses to a stop. "Embarrassing me, Eloise. You defended my wife's memory? You stood up to a man twice your size." "I couldn't stand hearing him talk about her that way. Or you—" She twisted her hands in her lap. "I know I never met Martha, but from everything I can see the ranch, the town. She must have been remarkable." "She was—" "I'm not trying to replace her." "I know." He took her hand. "What you said in there. Martha would have liked you. You've got the same steel in your spine." They rode in companionable silence for a while before Eloise spoke again. "He wasn't entirely wrong, you know." "About what?" "People will talk. They'll say I'm after your land, your money, that I'm taking advantage of a grieving widower. Let them talk. It's not that simple. Your reputation—" "My reputation?" He laughed, surprising himself. "I've been the crazy hermit on the hill for 15 years. You've given them something new to gossip about, probably doing them a favor." That night, word of the confrontation spread through the valley like wildfire. By morning, Thatcher expected to be persona non grata in town. Instead, Jake Monroe showed up with his wife May and apple pie. "Heard you gave Bert McDubbins what he's had coming for years," May said, bustling into the kitchen like she belonged there. She was a small, energetic woman with graying hair and kind eyes. "About time someone did." "May," Jake warned. "What? It's true." She turned to Eloise. "My dear, I've been wanting to meet you. Any woman who can get Thatcher Kane back among the living is someone I need to know." Eloise glanced at Thatcher uncertainly. "I didn't—" "Oh, but you did. Jake's been trying for years. Even tried to get him to come to socials. Introduce him to nice women. Nothing worked." May settled at the kitchen table. "Then you show up and suddenly he's in town regular, buying fabric and sugar and defending ladies' honor. It's like watching a resurrection." "May, you're embarrassing them," Jake said, but he was grinning. "Good. Someone needs to—" May patted Eloise's hand. "Now, the spring dance is in 2 weeks. You'll come, of course." "We don't dance," Thatcher said quickly. "You used to. Remember the harvest dance in '68 you and Martha won the waltz competition?" May's eyes softened. "She'd want you to dance again. Thatcher, you know she would." After the Monroes left May extracting a promise that they'd at least consider the dance, Thatcher found Eloise in the garden plot, turning over soil for spring planting. "Your friends are nice," she said without looking up. "May can be overwhelming." "She cares about you. They both do." She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "Were you serious about not dancing?" "I haven't danced since Martha died." "Because you can't, or because you won't?" He considered the question. "Won't, I suppose." "I understand." She went back to her digging. "Thomas loved to dance. Used to waltz me around our tiny apartment until the downstairs neighbors complained. I haven't danced since he died either." They worked in silence, side by side, preparing the ground for new growth. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. That evening, as Eloise sewed by the fire, Thatcher found himself saying, "I punched McDubbins because he insulted you, not because of what he said about Martha." She looked up. "I know. I wanted you to know that you're not living in her shadow. Not anymore." "What am I living in then?" He crossed to her chair, knelt beside it. "Your own light, our light, maybe." She set aside her sewing and touched his face gently. Thatcher Kane, are you courting me? I believe I am. Miss Mercer, if you'll have me. I believe I will, Mr. Kane. It was the first time they'd kissed, there by the fire, with spring pressing at the windows. It was gentle, tentative. Two people learning each other after long loneliness. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. About that dance, Eloise said softly. Yes, maybe it's time we both learned to dance again. He thought about it stepping into the social hall, facing the stares and whispers, holding Eloise in his arms while music played. It terrified him, but looking at her hopeful face, he realized something. He was more afraid of disappointing her than facing the town. All right, he said. We'll go to the dance. Her smile was worth any amount of gossip. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding. Time to let the world see that Thatcher Kane was among the living again. Thanks to a woman who'd arrived by mistake and stayed by choice, the best mistakes he was learning sometimes led to the greatest blessings. The attic had been closed for 15 years. Thatcher stood at the bottom of the ladder, looking up at the trap door, while Eloise waited beside him with a lamp. We don't have to do this today, she said gently. Yes, we do. He'd been putting it off for weeks, ever since the dance where they'd waltzed together while the whole town watched, where he'd held her close and felt something shift inside him, some last wall beginning to crumble. If we're going to move forward, he climbed the ladder and pushed open the door. Dust motes swirled in the shaft of light. The attic was exactly as he'd left it, trunks and boxes, furniture covered in sheets, a lifetime of memories stored away. Eloise followed him up, holding the lamp high. Oh, Thatcher! He knew what she was seeing. Martha's things, carefully packed and labeled in her precise handwriting. Her wedding dress visible through the glass window of a trunk. Books she'd loved. The quilt she'd been working on, still stretched on its frame. After she died, I just put it all up here. Couldn't bear to look at it. Couldn't bear to throw it away. He touched a dusty box. Like if I kept it all, maybe she wasn't really gone, Eloise finished softly. He nodded, throat tight. They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the artifacts of a life cut short. This is beautiful, Eloise said, moving to the quilt frame. The pattern, I've never seen anything like it. She called it Garden of Time. Each square was supposed to represent a year of our marriage. She'd finished 10 squares. His voice cracked, never got to the 11th. Eloise studied the intricate stitching, the careful color choices. It should be finished. I don't sew. I do. She looked at him. If you'd let me, not to replace what she did, but to honor it, complete what she started. The idea of someone else touching Martha's last project should have felt like sacrilege. Instead, it felt like relief. She'd have wanted it finished. They spent the afternoon going through boxes. Some things were easy clothes that could be donated, books that could return to the shelves. Others were harder. Thatcher found himself telling stories about each item, and Eloise listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that helped him remember the good times instead of just the loss. This was from our trip to Denver, he said, holding up a small music box. She saw it in a shop window and just stood there, enchanted. Went back and bought it the next day. It's lovely. Eloise wound the key, and a delicate melody filled the dusty space. What's the tune? Beautiful Dreamer. She used to hum it while she worked. They were almost done when Eloise noticed a small trunk tucked in the corner, different from the others. What's in that one? Thatcher frowned. I don't remember that. He pulled it out, brushing off the dust. His name was written on top in Martha's hand. Inside was an envelope, also with his name, and beneath it, baby clothes. Eloise breathed. Tiny gowns and caps, knitted booties, a soft blanket embroidered with small flowers, All the things Martha had been making in secret, planning to surprise him. With shaking hands, Thatcher opened the envelope. "My dearest Thatcher," he read aloud. "If you're reading this, then something has happened and our child will need you to be both mother and father. I know you're strong enough. I know you'll love our baby the way you've loved me completely, without reservation. Don't close your heart. Our child will need to see love in action, to know that joy is possible even after sorrow. Promise me you'll show them that." He had to stop, unable to continue. Eloise took the letter gently, reading the rest silently before setting it aside. "She was pregnant?" she asked softly. "No, she hoped to be, someday." He touched the tiny clothes. "I never knew she'd made these." "She loved you very much." "I know." He looked at Eloise. "But she's gone. And I'm here, and you're here, and I think she'd understand." Eloise reached across the trunk and took his hand. They sat there among the memories, holding onto each other while dust motes danced around them like tiny prayers. That evening, Eloise spread Martha's quilt frame in the sewing room. She studied the completed squares, understanding the pattern now each one told a story, captured a moment. Spring flowers for their wedding, autumn leaves for their first harvest together, snowflakes for winter evenings by the fire. "I'll need your help," she told Thatcher, "to know what should go in the remaining squares." "I don't know if I can." "We'll do it together, one square at a time." They started that night, Thatcher sketching out memories while Eloise translated them into fabric and thread. The 11th square would be a sunrise, Martha's last morning, when she'd kissed him goodbye and headed to the field hospital, but also a new beginning, because every ending carried the seeds of something new. As Eloise worked, Thatcher found himself talking about things he'd never spoken aloud. The baby they'd lost in the second year, how Martha had grieved but then thrown herself into helping others, the dreams they'd shared of filling the house with children, the last letter she'd sent from the field hospital, full of stories about the patients she was helping. "She signed it until tomorrow, my love," he said. "But tomorrow never came." "It did," Eloise said gently, "just not the tomorrow you expected." Over the following days, they developed a rhythm. Mornings were for the ranch Eloise had taken to helping with the cattle, proving herself surprisingly adept. Afternoons were for town business and social calls, slowly integrating themselves into the community as a couple. But evenings were for the quilt, for memories and stories and the careful stitching together of past and present. "You're changing the pattern," Thatcher noticed one evening, watching her work on the 15th square. "Just a little. See here, that's Martha's style, and here that's mine. They're different, but they work together." He studied the blended stitching, the way she'd honored Martha's technique while adding her own touches. "Like us." "Like us," she agreed. The night they finished the last square, the 20th, representing not years but hopes for the future, they spread the completed quilt on their bed. It was beautiful, telling the story of one love ending and another beginning, all woven together in fabric and thread. "She would have loved this," Thatcher said. "She would have loved that you're happy." Eloise corrected. "That you kept your heart open, like she asked." They stood looking at the quilt, and Thatcher felt something settle in his chest, not an ending to grief that would always be part of him, but an integration of it. Martha would always be his first love, the woman who'd taught him how to love at all. But Eloise was his second chance, the woman who'd taught him that love could bloom again, different but equally real. "Thank you," he said, pulling her close, "for finishing what she started, for understanding that loving you doesn't mean forgetting her." "Thank you," she replied, "for letting me be part of your story, all of it." That night, they lay under the quilt that told both their stories. In the trunk in the corner, carefully refolded, were the baby clothes Martha had made with such hope. They would use them someday, Thatcher thought, when they had children of their own. They'd wrap them in Martha's love and Eloise's love. in the continuity of life that keeps moving forward even when we think it's stopped. The ghosts were still there, would always be there, but they were peaceful ghosts now, integrated into the fabric of their new life. In the morning, they'd face the future together, but tonight, under a quilt made of memory and hope. They simply held each other and let the past and present merge into something beautiful and whole. Spring arrived like a miracle after the long winter. The snow melted from the mountains, revealing green grass that seemed impossibly bright. The ranch came alive with new calves, sprouting gardens, and something else, hope. Eloise stood in the doorway of the kitchen, hand resting on her still flat stomach, watching Thatcher work with a young colt in the corral. He moved with easy confidence, patient with the skittish animal. She hadn't told him yet, had been holding the secret close for 2 weeks now, waiting for the right moment. "You're glowing," May Monroe said from behind her, making her jump. "May, I didn't hear you arrive." "Jake's talking Thatcher's ear off about cattle prices." May studied her shrewdly. "How far along?" Eloise's hand went instinctively to her stomach. "How did you—" "Honey, I've had 5 children. I know the look." May's face softened. "Have you told him?" "Not yet. I'm scared." "Of what?" Eloise moved to the table, May following. "He lost a baby once before, with Martha, and after finding those baby clothes she'd made." She twisted her hands. "What if he's not ready? What if it brings back too much pain?" "What if it brings him joy?" May countered. "Eloise, that man has been walking around like he's got stars in his eyes ever since you agreed to marry him. Properly marry him. I mean, not this strange arrangement you started with." The wedding had been small, just 3 weeks ago. A simple ceremony with Jake and May as witnesses. The preacher trying not to smile at how Thatcher couldn't stop looking at his bride. They'd honeymooned right at the ranch, too early in the season to leave the animals. "He bought cinnamon," Eloise said suddenly. "Pardon?" "In town yesterday. He bought cinnamon because he remembered I like it in my coffee. Such a small thing, but," she smiled, "he notices everything, remembers everything." "Then trust him with this. Trust that he'll notice what you need, remember what matters." After May left, Eloise tried to find the right moment, during lunch, but Thatcher was preoccupied with a sick calf during their evening walk. But the sunset was too beautiful to interrupt. By the fire after dinner, but he was reading aloud from a book of poetry they'd found in Martha's things, and his voice was so peaceful she couldn't disturb it. Finally, as they prepared for bed, she couldn't wait any longer. "Thatcher, I need to tell you something." He looked up from banking the fire, immediately alert to her tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think so. I hope not." She was babbling. That is—" He crossed to her, taking her hands. "Eloise, just say it." "I'm going to have a baby." The words hung in the air between them. Thatcher's face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, fear, and finally something that looked like awe. "You're certain?" "Yes, I saw Doc Hendricks yesterday when you were at the feed store." His hands tightened on hers. "How long?" "About 2 months. He thinks the baby should come in October." "October," he repeated, as if tasting the word. Then, suddenly, he was pulling her into his arms, holding her like she was made of spun glass. "A baby! Our baby! You're happy?" The question came out muffled against his chest. He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were wet. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, yes, overwhelmed, absolutely, but happy." He cupped her face. "Eloise, you've given me everything. A reason to live again, a home that feels like home, and now—" "A family," she finished. "A family." He kissed her, then dropped to his knees, pressing his ear to her stomach. "Hello in there. This is your father. Your mother and I have been waiting for you." Eloise ran her fingers through his hair. tears streaming down her face. "I was afraid you wouldn't be ready. After Martha, after the baby you lost." He looked up at her. "That's part of our story, but this is a new chapter, a new life. Martha would have been the first to celebrate." He stood, pulling her close again.
She probably would have started knitting booties the minute she suspected.
"About that," Eloise said, managing a watery smile. "I found her pattern books. I thought maybe I could learn."
"You want to use her patterns? If that's all right, it feels like she's part of this too. Like we're all connected."
Thatcher was quiet for a long moment. She saved baby clothes for a child she never had. Maybe they were meant for this baby all along. Maybe everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. They stood holding each other, processing the magnitude of the change coming their way. Outside, a spring storm was building, but inside, they were safe and warm and growing. Over the next days, Thatcher transformed. He'd always been attentive, but now he was almost comically protective. He tried to stop Eloise from lifting anything heavier than a teacup, insisted she rest in the afternoons, and started planning renovations to the small room next to theirs.
"I can still work,"
she protested one morning when he tried to take over making breakfast. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "Humor me," he said, steering her to a chair. "I haven't had a pregnant wife to fuss over before. Let me enjoy it." She did, mainly because the joy on his face was worth any minor inconvenience. He talked to the baby constantly, telling stories about the ranch, about the mountains, about the life waiting for them. "Your mother is the strongest woman I know," he said one evening. His hand spread over her growing stomach. "She crossed the country on faith, survived a terrible fever, and taught me how to live again. You're already lucky, little one."
"And your father,"
Eloise added, "is the gentlest man I know. He saved me when I had nowhere to go, showed me what real love looks like, and makes me laugh every day." "We're a pair, aren't we?" Thatcher mused. "A lonely rancher and a misplaced bride." "Not lonely anymore," she corrected. "Not misplaced. Right where we're supposed to be." The news spread through the valley like wildfire. May Monroe organized a quilting bee, where the women of Millwater gathered to make baby blankets while sharing advice that made Eloise's head spin. Even Mrs. Patterson, the gossipy store owner, seemed genuinely happy for them. "About time this ranch had the sound of children again," she said, presenting Eloise with a pair of tiny knitted socks. "The cane spread has been too quiet for too long." Jake slapped Thatcher on the back so hard he nearly knocked him over. "A father never thought I'd see the day. You realize this means our kids will grow up together. May's expecting again, too." The shared news made it even more real. Their children would have playmates, would grow up in a community that had embraced their unusual beginning and celebrated their joy. One afternoon, Thatcher found Eloise in Martha's sewing room, now fully hers, working on a tiny gown using Martha's patterns. The spring sunlight caught the silver in her hair when had those threads appeared and illuminated the peaceful concentration on her face. "I love you," he said suddenly. She looked up, surprised. He'd said it before, but rarely so spontaneously. "I love you," he repeated, coming into the room. "I love our life. I love our baby. I love that you're using Martha's patterns and adding your own touches. I love that you hum when you cook and that you talk to the chickens and that you've taught me how to hope again." She set aside her sewing and stood, wrapping her arms around him. "I love you too, all of you, even the parts that still hurt sometimes." "Especially those parts," he said into her hair, "because they're what brought us together." That night, as spring rain pattered against the windows, they lay in bed planning for the future, names for the baby, improvements to the house, dreams they'd never dared voice before. "If it's a girl," Eloise said, "I'd like to call her Hope." "Hope Kane," Thatcher tested. "I like it. And if it's a boy?" "You choose." He thought for a moment. Thomas, after your first husband, he helped make you who you are. He deserves to be remembered too.
Eloise's eyes filled with tears.
You do that. We're building on the past, not erasing it. Thomas, Martha, Elizabeth, they're all part of our story. Our baby should know that love doesn't end. It just changes shape. As if in response, the baby moved for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings. They both froze. Then Thatcher's face lit up like Christmas morning. Was that? Yes. Eloise placed his hand where she'd felt the movement.
Say hello to your papa, little one.
They waited, hardly breathing. And then there, a tiny push against Thatcher's palm. A greeting, a promise, a future. Spring had come to the ranch in more ways than one, bringing new life, new hope, and the kind of joy that only comes after surviving winter. The baby would arrive with the harvest, when the work of growth was complete and the time for gathering blessings had come. It was, Thatcher thought as he felt his child move again, a perfect season for miracles. The October sun hung low over the valley, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Eloise sat on the porch, her hand resting on her swollen belly, watching Thatcher and Jake bring in the last of the harvest. The baby was due any day now, and she felt as ripe as the wheat they were storing in the barn.
You should be resting,
May called from the doorway, carrying a tray of cider and fresh bread.
I've been resting for weeks.
Eloise replied,
Any more rest and I'll grow roots.
May laughed, settling beside her. I remember that feeling, like you're waiting for the world to begin again. They watched the men work in companionable silence. Thatcher kept glancing toward the house, checking on her even from a distance. He'd been like a worried hen all through the harvest, recruiting extra hands so he could stay close to home.
He's changed so much,
May observed. When you first arrived, he was like a ghost haunting his own life. Now look at him. Eloise smiled, remembering that cold February day when she'd stepped off the wagon into an uncertain future. We've both changed. I came here running from grief, and found... A sharp pain cut off her words. She gripped the arm of her chair, breathing carefully.
Was that? I think so.
Another wave rolled through her. May, could you... But May was already on her feet. Jake Thatcher, it's time. The next hours blurred together. Doc Hendricks arrived, calm and efficient. May took charge of the household, sending Jake for supplies and keeping water boiling. Thatcher refused to leave Eloise's side, letting her squeeze his hand through each wave of pain. I'm here, he kept saying. I'm not going anywhere. As night fell, their child entered the world with a fierce cry that made Thatcher laugh through his tears. It's a girl, Doc Hendricks announced, placing the baby in Eloise's arms. Healthy and perfect. Hope, Eloise whispered, touching the baby's cheek.
Hello, Hope.
Thatcher leaned over them both, his face transformed with wonder.
She's beautiful, just like her mother.
The baby opened her eyes gray like Eloise's and seemed to study them both with ancient wisdom. Then she yawned, tiny fist waving, and both parents were utterly lost.
Welcome to the world, little one,
Thatcher murmured. You were worth the wait. The weeks that followed were a blur of feedings and diapers, sleepless nights and quiet miracles. Hope proved to be a content baby, only fussing when hungry or wet. Thatcher took to fatherhood like he'd been preparing for it all his life, walking the floors at night so Eloise could rest, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice until Hope settled. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Eloise found him in the nursery, Hope asleep against his chest while he sat in the rocking chair Martha had never gotten to use. She's going to be spoiled rotten, Eloise said softly. Probably, he agreed without shame. I've got 15 years of love stored up. She's going to get all of it. Eloise perched on the arm of the chair, running her fingers through his hair. What are you thinking about? Everything, he said simply. How I thought my life was over.
How I was just existing, not living. And then you showed up with your carpet bag and your city shoes, and everything changed. Best mistake ever made, she said, echoing what had become their private joke.
Not a mistake, he corrected, looking up at her. A miracle. You, Hope. This life, we've built all of it. Christmas came with a vengeance that year. Snow piling high against the windows. But inside the Kane house, warmth reigned. Jake and May brought their children over for Christmas dinner, and the house rang with laughter it hadn't heard in decades. Remember last Christmas? Jake said, bouncing Hope on his knee while she gurgled happily. I was trying to convince you to at least come to town for the social. And I told you to mind your own business, Thatcher recalled. Good thing I didn't listen, Jake grinned. Though I notice you haven't thanked me for my matchmaking services. You want thanks for forging a letter and tricking two people? When it works out this well, absolutely. Thatcher looked at Eloise, who was helping May's youngest with a puzzle, her face glowing in the lamplight. At Hope, who had Jake wrapped around her tiny finger. At the friends who'd become family. The house that had become a home again. Thank you, he said quietly. Jake's grin softened. You're welcome, brother. As winter gave way to spring, Hope grew round and happy, reaching for everything, laughing at the chickens, fascinated by the world around her. Eloise had returned to the garden, now with a basket beside her where Hope could watch her work. Thatcher would find them there in the afternoons. Eloise explaining the plants to the baby as if she could understand every word. Your mama's teaching you early, he said one day, scooping Hope up. She squealed with delight, reaching for his hat. Never too early to learn about growing things, Eloise said, brushing dirt from her hands. Besides, she's a good listener. Like her mother. He shifted Hope to one arm and pulled Eloise close with the other. Have I told you today that I love you? Only 3 times. Not nearly enough then. He kissed her, Hope babbling between them. I love you. I love our daughter. I love our life. Even the sleepless nights, the endless diapers. Even those. He looked out over their land, the thriving ranch, the garden coming to life, the mountains standing eternal guard. You know what I realized? I spent 15 years thinking I was being faithful to Martha by staying alone. But I was wrong. She would have hated what I became. She would have wanted you happy, Eloise agreed. She would have wanted me alive. He corrected, really alive, like I am now. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Hope sleeping in Eloise's arms, Thatcher found himself thinking about the strange twists that had brought them here. A forged letter, a desperate woman, a bitter man. Somehow, from those unpromising ingredients, they'd created something beautiful. What are you smiling about? Eloise asked. Just thinking about Jake's letter. How angry I was when you first arrived. You tried very hard to scowl me away, she remembered. Fortunately, I'm stubborn. Fortunately, he agreed. You know, I never asked what made you answer that advertisement of all the possibilities. Why mine? She was quiet for a moment, considering. It was the line about isolation. Most men trying to attract a bride would hide that, make their situation sound more appealing. But the letter was honest about the difficulties. I thought any man willing to admit the challenges might also be worth the risk. Even though it wasn't really me writing. But it was you, in a way. Jake knew you well enough to capture something true, even in a lie. She smiled. And I'm glad he did. Otherwise, I might still be scrubbing floors in Baltimore, and you might still be eating beans from a pot. A tragedy avoided, he said solemnly, making her laugh. Hope stirred at the sound, opening her eyes and immediately reaching for her father. He took her, settling her against his shoulder where she promptly grabbed his collar and began chewing it. She's teething again, Eloise sighed. Let her chew. Shirts can be washed. He patted Hope's back gently. You know what I want to tell her. when she's old enough to understand.
What's that?
That sometimes the best things come from the worst mistakes. That love can find you when you least expect it, in forms you never imagined. That it's never too late to start living again.
That's a lot of wisdom for a baby.
She'll grow into it. He looked at Eloise, his eyes soft with love. After all, she's got the best teacher, a woman brave enough to travel across the country on a hope and a prayer. And stubborn enough to stay when she got there, Eloise added. Thank God for that stubbornness. He reached over and took her hand, threading their fingers together. I thought I'd live and die alone. Thought that was what I deserved. But you were the one mistake I needed. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together, a family forged from loss and hope, from chances taken and love discovered. The ranch spread out before them, no longer a monument to loneliness, but a testament to resilience. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and somewhere an owl hooted its nighttime greeting. Hope had fallen asleep again, peaceful in her father's arms. Eloise leaned against Thatcher's shoulder, and he pressed a kiss to her hair. They didn't need words anymore. The life they'd built said everything necessary. The lonely rancher who hadn't touched a woman in 15 years was gone. In his place sat a husband, a father, a man who'd learned that sometimes the universe's mistakes were actually its greatest gifts. And as the night settled over the valley, bringing with it the promise of all the tomorrows to come, Thatcher Kane held his family close and gave thanks for the beautiful accident that had brought them together. The mail-order bride who'd arrived by mistake had become the love that arrived just in time, and that, they both knew, was no mistake at all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Thatcher and Eloise's journey. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Hit that like button, and don't forget to click the hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means the world